right, so I'm gonna welcome everybody to the second session of our course on anti-Semitism. As people are joining us in all kinds of places, I'm gonna share my screen with the little welcome slide that we have.
Or does he want us all to be? No? Okay,
Do you want to open view gallery, or let's see. Go to view.
Shalom.
View. Look at see side by side gallery. See if that there's all the
Here we are.
people.
Okay, this person meditates every day.
Now we are.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing the screen with our opening slide and welcome you all who are here joining us on Zoom. We have a lot to cover tonight, and so I want to actually really get started kind of right away, so that we can go through all that I have prepared for us tonight. I'm very excited to have all of you back here this week on this on the first steps on this really powerful journey that we're taking together. I want to start tonight acknowledging the anniversary of Kristallnacht, which is in fact tonight and tomorrow. As obviously the night meets us in the context of this course, and as we'll talk about as the course unfolds, the night of Kristallnacht is a consequence of all that I am sharing and will be sharing with you, as you will see as things unfold. Kristallnacht happened the November 9th and 10th of 1938. It is usually understood to be the night of broken glass. That's usually the name that that we hear being spoken of, but it's really literally the night, really like the German says, the night of broken crystal. The word for glass, as broken glass in German, is glass. So this is really a different name that the Nazi chose, and they chose to name Kristallnacht on purpose. And crystal, as we all know, is precious. Crystal is expensive. And so in the anti-Semitic propaganda, was that the Nazis were attacking those blood-sucking, wealthy, capitalistic Jews and their crystal lifestyle. That's really how they framed it, and that's why they use this specific word of crystal. And during these 24 hours of pogroms, really, we know that rioters ransacked Jewish homes, hospitals, schools. They destroyed 267 synagogues, and not just in Germany, but also in Austria and in the Sudetenland, those land that were south of Germany and north of what at the time was Czechoslovakia. Those lands that will be the main cause of dispute and caused the first invasion by the Nazis of beyond their borders. That during those pogroms, over 7,000 Jewish businesses were damaged, were destroyed, and 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and incarcerated in concentration camps. So I want to start tonight with a moment of silence to mark this dark anniversary. And at the end of that silence, we'll have a shalom chant to also bring those energies into the space and between us. So I invite you to close your eyes, to find your breath, and just to rest in memory of Kristallnacht. Thank you. So I want to go back to a story that I was sharing last week. The story about, if you remember, Jews naming their kids Alexander back in Greek times. Naming their kid Alexander after the name of their conqueror. And we might have, thought last week as I was sharing that story, why on earth would they do something like that? And the irony of it all, actually, is that the last of the Hashmonean kings from that family who revolted or led the revolt really against and obviously eventually defeated the Greek armies, that last king of the Hashmonean family, his name was Alexander. His name was Alexander Yanai. Now there is a great book, and if you're going to read any book during this class, that's the book that I would recommend you read, and I'm going to quote from it. You probably maybe already have read it. It's called People Love Dead Jews, and it's written by Dare Horn. It's a wonderful book, and I'm just going to mention one of the stories that she tells through the book. Actually, I'm going to mention her book several times because it is going to be connected to a lot of the stories that I'm going to share. But in that book, People Love Dead Jews, Dara Horns debunks the myth of Ellis Island. The story that the Jews came ashore the United States and had their last name was changed by the immigration officers who welcomed them off the boat because they could not somehow understand their name. And it's actually the whole chapter is a wonderful chapter, kind of musing about the whys Jews have changed their names through history. It's really a must read. I don't know if I want to give you the what happens in her story, but I can hint to tell you that story of the Jews getting their name changed at Ellis Island did not happen. That is an invented story, and the reason it is an important story and an important story to debunk is because what is hiding underneath it is anti-Semitism. The Jews went through Ellis Island, you can read in the chapter how it exactly happened. Their names were unchanged. And Darahorn explains to you why that is true. It is after, once the Jews immigrated, once the Jews crossed the borders, once the Jews began to settle in America, that anti-Semitism pushed them to changing their names, just like in Greek times, to change their names so that they could fit in, so that they could pretend to be long-term American citizens, so that they would not stand out, so that it could be easier for them to integrate and assimilate in America's society. And they would not have had to do that. We know for sure they would not have had to do that if there wasn't anti-Semitism pushing them, incentivizing them to do so. So I just wanted to bring that as part of our conversation about, again, 2,300 years ago, why did the Jews do that? Well, the Jews did that almost in every generation, wherever they went, wherever they immigrated, including our family names, including the generations of Jews who've come to America. So it's not a story told a long time ago. It's a story of today that keeps repeating itself. Okay, so where were we? Where were we when I left you? I think I left us with a cliffhanger last week with telling you that I was about to give you examples of how early Jewish Christians, and that's important to have those two words together, right? Jews who followed the teachings of Jesus, Jewish Christians, and how those early Jewish Christians lifted off the pages of Jewish scriptures from the Torah, from the book of Psalms, from the book of prophets, the stories, passages, verses that help them construct and frame the story of Jesus. And then pretended that Jesus' story was in fact the prophetic fulfillment that all of these passages foreshadowed about him. And I mentioned how the Christian scholars have called these reweaving of Jewish scriptures into the story of Jesus, and then the false pretense that he was reverse engineered. They called it, if you remember, not history remembered, I quote, not history remembered, but prophecy historicized. Now, let me give you a few critical points, critical examples. Jesus' last words, important. Jesus' last words as is crucified. In the Gospels of Mark and Matthew, Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Like we say, famous last words. My God, why have you forsaken me? Now, let me read to you the beginning of Psalm 22. Psalm 22, a psalm of David. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why so far from delivering me from my anguished roaring? Lifted off the page. Now, Jesus' last words read a little bit differently in the Gospels of Luke. Father, Jesus says, into your hands I commit my spirit. Now, listen to Psalm 31, verse 6. a verse that actually we sing during the High Holidays. One of the songs of the High Holidays at Bet Aleph, but I'm sure in other communities, maybe with a different melody. Beyadecha afkid ruchi, padita oti ya el emet. For those of you who know that song at Bet Aleph, Beyadecha afkid ruchi, padita oti ya el emet. What does that say? Into your hands I commit my spirit. You redeem me, God of truth. Now another quote. As Jesus actually died in Matthew, in Mark, and in Luke, we read, darkness came over the land from noon until 3 in the afternoon. Now Amos chapter 8 verse 9, we read, and on that day I will make the sun set at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. Now listen, I have more. Actually, I could spend the night, but we're going to move on at some point. Listen to this passage from Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53, Isaiah is speaking metaphorically about the people Israel. Now you have to understand one thing, that Hebrew doesn't have an it. Everything in Hebrew is either a he or a she, right? So when the text speaks as a he, the he is referring to Israel. Israel is a he, even though the people of Israel in English would be an it, in Hebrew it's a he, because of that limitation in the language. Now, listen to the story from Isaiah talking about Israel, and tell me if you don't hear, I don't know, inspiration, let's call it, for a group of mourning Jews, Jesus's disciples, who knew that story, who knew Isaiah by heart, right? And use this little passage to create a character for their own story, and then send the not so subtle message, and we'll talk about that because this is the beginning of anti-Semitism from the church, the message that Jesus is now the new Israel, is now the he that used to be Israel, but now the he can be read as Jesus, right? So listen to that short passage from Isaiah. He had no form of comeliness that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, suffering and acquainted with disease. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our sickness and carried our suffering. He was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that made us whole, and by his bruises we were healed. That's Isaiah talking about Israel pleading to God. But you can see how easy it was to use this to tell the story they wanted to tell. Now that group of Jesus's mourners continued to meet during Shiva, and then during Shloshim, and then even further. And they continued to meet and tell stories, and told this critical one, I think, a critical one that we find in the Gospel of John. When the Roman soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garment and made 4 parts, one for each soldier. But his tunic was without seam. woven from top to bottom. So they said to one another, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see whose it shall be. Right, so that's one part of the story. Keep that in mind. But then the story continues a few verses later. Now it's getting late, and they have to kind of speed up, I guess, the dying process of those three men they had crucified. And in order to do that, they had a very gruesome strategy they used. So just the 2 or 3 verses after what I just read, it says, the soldier then broke the bones of the first men who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they didn't break his legs. Okay? So 2 parts of that story. Now, let me read to you Psalm 22. The same psalm that I just mentioned, that begins with, my God, why have you forsaken me? Same psalm. Here it says, dogs have surrounded me, a pack of evildoers. Like lions, they maul my hands. They maul my hands and feet, sorry. Now, Christian translation don't use the word mauling for the lions. They use the word pierce. So listen to that. Like lions, they pierce my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They look on and gloat over me. They divide my garments among themselves and cast lots for my clothing. I mean, it's fascinating. Almost 1-to-1. Copied over. Now, one thing I didn't mention in the Gospel of John is that there is one little sentence that he keeps repeating at the end of a few of these passages. That little sentence that really changes everything. The little sentence that he adds, retelling or reframing those stories, repeatedly affirm, and I quote, so that scripture would be fulfilled. So that scripture would be fulfilled. One, because he knew his Jewish audience would recognize these borrowed verses. And he sought to bring them to the conclusion that he wanted them to draw. And that's why he had this little sentence. Now, these Jewish tellers of the story of Jesus, who were dipping so generously in Hebrew scriptures to tell that story, which is the only scriptures actually they had available and knew by heart, they did so like many others before them. It was not a unique literary device, because the truth is that it's easier to tell a new story and for your story to be accepted by your audience if you're able to mix the new with the old, so that in this case your Jewish listeners at the time, right, would be able to recognize in it parts of the story they already know. Right? Those stories will feel very familiar. So you can retell the stories. You've captured the attention of your audience, but then you add the new part, the twist part of that story. Because these early listeners of those stories would have known full well that they were not historical. They would have obviously known that the seamless robe of the story that I just shared, for example, right? That the seamless robe of the story had nothing to do with whatever Jesus was wearing that day. I mean, would anyone think that he had the chance to change into a seamless robe between the Last Supper and the moment of his crucifixion? It's an illusion. It's a metaphor. And it's a metaphor that is really actually very important and is very directed. It's a metaphor that is pointing to the one person, the one and only person who wore such a robe. And that one and only person who wore such a robe was the high priest in the temple of Jerusalem. And the one time that the high priest in the temple wore that robe was on one occasion, and one occasion only, on one day, which is the day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the highest of all the holy days of Jewish tradition, when he alone was allowed to enter into the Holy of Holies. And that's the subtle, not so subtle, message that the writer is sharing with us, that Jesus was now the high priest. Jesus is now the high priest, the only one allowed to enter the Holy of Holies. So understand that for that first circle of Jesus' followers, the early disciples, these details were not meant to be a proof of anything. The point for them was to mourn. The point was to grieve through the storytelling. The point was trying to make sense, to create order out of the chaos around them. For them, really, the point was the story. But those who decades later wrote the Gospels, committed those stories to writing, because at the time of the disciples of Jesus, those were oral stories. They twisted the stories to, in fact, to add that little sentence from John, right? Because at that point, those Jewish Christians now were in competition with this other sect of Judaism that were evolving out of the ashes of the temple. What is going to be the beginning, the early days of rabbinic Judaism, rabbis who were the survivors of the political party, which I talked about last week, of the Pharisees. Right? The surviving Pharisees, the surviving rabbis of the Roman disaster, who had just begun to redefine Judaism post-temple with the first writings of the Talmud. And that sentence, really born of sibling rivalry, right? Sibling rivalry for the grand prize of being named the true Israel. That one sentence and that shift in consciousness as to the purpose of the writing of the story, that one sentence will become, in fact, the dagger of anti-Jewish and then anti-Semitic hatred planted over and over again through the centuries in the back of Jews everywhere. Why? Because, and here's the first critical point in the birth of anti-Semitism from the church. So that scripture would be fulfilled, what John writes over and over again. So that scripture would be fulfilled gives birth to supersession. The concept of supersession. The idea that Christianity has supplanted Judaism and is its God-ordained continuation and evolution. Christianity is the God-ordained continuation and evolution of Judaism. The fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures. Judaism, it is now spoken overtly or covertly. Judaism has failed to evolve. That's what the message really is. Judaism has failed to evolve. It is now the religion of the past. Christianity is its rightful heir It has come to fulfill it, and it is the religion of today and the religion of tomorrow. And in fact, one of the very anti-Semitic expressions that we still use today, unknowingly, reflecting this supersession, this supplanting, this overtaking of Judaism by Christianity, is this expression that we use all the time as the Old Testament. The Old Testament is set, of course, in opposition to the New Testament. Now think about the message this is sending, both overtly and covertly, right? I mean, you maybe never have paid attention to those words, but those are expressions that are examples of the way Christians have disparagingly defined Judaism, the religion of old. What do we associate with that, right? Passé, done for, versus the New Testament, the new, better, more evolved, right? The old needs to just be trashed, needs to be discarded. Who needs to keep anything old around? No, let's connect with the New Testament. So I and many others don't call either one of those either the Old or the New Testament. Both of them are, in fact, anti-Semitic as far as I'm concerned. I'm inviting you to also change the words you use and simply call the Jewish Bible the Jewish Bible, and the Christian Bible the Christian Bible. It's okay. It's fine. We can do that. Now, let me tell you another story. I love to tell stories, so I'm going to tell a lot of stories today. I was talking to a Christian friend of mine a few weeks ago, and she shared with me that years before she had somehow been invited to the local synagogue where she used to live, to the Beit Midrash. The Beit Midrash is the place where Jews gather to study texts together. And her Jewish host had told her to join her and the group of the synagogue members who were gathering to study scripture that day. And my friend, who is very involved in the interfaith world, a lover of text study herself, gratefully accepted the invitation. Now, what happened next left her both in shock and in awe. Now, there was a group of Jews that, as soon as the books were opened, began to argue loudly, gesticulating fiercely, yelling at each other across the table and even across the room, red-faced, for the entire 90 minutes of the gathering, debating the intricacies of each line of each passage of the text, defending this rabbi's position against that rabbi's position, this commentary against that commentary, as if, she told me, it felt as if their lives depended on it. But then, she was telling me, when the time was up and the books were closed, the voices just died down completely. Smiles appeared on everyone's face. Hugs and kisses flew all around, and they all adjourned to the next room, sharing a little nosh and asking about each other's kids and grandkids and visiting together as best friends do, before each of them went on their own way for the rest of the day. Now, my Christian friend still cannot believe what happened there. But the story speaks. I mention the story because not only is that a highlight of her interface experiences, but because it speaks of the fierce debates that in fact animated the rabbis, the Pharisees, and the early Jewish Christians in these early years preceding and following the burning down of the temple in 70 CE. That's the context. It was fierce, brotherly Beit Midrash argument, influenced in large part by the sibling attacks between Jews of different sects, and one of the reasons why the Christian Bible, in fact, is so keen on blaming the Pharisees for everything. You are going to blame your brother for the you know. First of all, it's makes you look better in the eyes of the Romans if you always point the finger to the other guys. But also it's a way for you to differentiate yourself, right? It's a way to tell people, don't go to that synagogue. Those are bad guys. Their interpretation of scriptures is terrible, right? Come to my synagogue. Our synagogue, we have wonderful teachings. We have this Jesus priest who spoke of love, and come. We reinterpreted all the text. Oh, and by the way, if you join our group, you don't have to be circumcised. Wow, that's awesome. Come, right? That's the context. That's the context. The truth of the matter is, reading the stories of Jesus, not just for this course, but many years of my life before, I believe that if Jesus had lived in Jerusalem and been politically involved, he would have joined the party of the Pharisees. He would have been a Pharisee himself, because he would have opposed the corrupt priesthood of the wealthy Sadducees, who sold out to the Roman oppressors, those who were despicable collaborators to this brutal Roman regime. Jesus would have been a Pharisee. There's no doubt in my mind. But the truth is, just like my Christian friend had no idea about what happens inside of Beit Midrash, in time, the increasing numbers of non-Jews, of pagans, who by the end of the first century were converting to Christianity, who knew nothing of Jewish scriptures, let alone of Jewish Beit Midrash, who didn't know the sources from which the story were told, they read them at face value. And worst of all, they took the most polemical Jewish expressions of sibling rivalry as literal truth. They how do we say that? They worked really hard to de-Judaize, I don't know if that's a word, to de-Judaize the very sources from which their own religion was born. And that will lead them to really create the deadliest Jew hatred. They de-Judaized Jesus. Now, maybe you don't believe me. So I'm going to share with you a picture. I'm going to share with you a picture. The picture is of the Last Supper. Pretty common kind of picture. And that's a picture that is a church painting. And there are many of them actually. I'm going to share with you several of those pictures. And you tell me what you see. This is a picture of the Last Supper in I'm not going to name the church, a very popular church. How many Jews do you see in this painting? I'm talking, I'm serious. Like the de-Judaizing of the story of Jesus. That's what you are looking at right now. There's only one Jew on this painting. Only one. And you can tell because, he's almost already a Nazi caricature, even though this is 1500, 1600 years old. There's only one Jew in this picture. And I don't need to point to which one that is. You already figured it out. The green-faced with a crooked finger turning his back on Jesus because he betrayed him, or he's about to betray him. And walking away, you can see he's walking away. He's wearing dark. His hair is long and covering his face. That's the one Jew in this picture. As far as Christianity is concerned, Jesus and the other 11 apostles, non-Jews. You can tell they don't look like the Jew in the picture. And I know maybe it sounds ridiculous, but think about it. When, that's how Christians would look at that painting. It's not, so what were these Pharisees, and by extension, all Jews, and I'm going to mention that as well, all Jews guilty of? What were they guilty of? They were guilty, which I mentioned is one of the critical bedrock, besides supersession, bedrock of anti-Semitism. The second one, they were guilty of never having accepted Jesus as the Messiah. That rejection threatened, and still does threaten, the Christian idea most profoundly. Why of all people would Jews be unmoved by this uncontrovertible, by the overwhelming proof, the logic so richly displayed in the teachings of their own scriptures? How can they not see the truth of Jesus Christ prophesied and then proven through and through by Jewish scriptures? So this Jewish denial of the Christian claim of Jesus as the fulfillment of Jewish scripture, of Jewish life altogether, and their rejection of him as Messiah remains to this day a mortal threat to Christianity. Why would that be a mortal threat to Christianity? Because the Jewish indifference to the coming of the one announced and prophesied Jewish Messiah calls the entire edifice of the church's teaching into question from the very start. And so the entire clash, the entire conflict between Judaism and Christianity begins right there. Supersession and rejection. And that conflict, that fight, is still to this day unresolved. Now, as the Gospel's final editions are being written, most likely in the 2 or 3 decades post Second Temple destruction, what was a sibling rivalry in maybe the first generation now turns into downright conflict as the story of Jesus is retold, committed to paper by the second and third generation of his less and less and less Jewish followers. Now the Romans are winning. Remember that part of the story. You cannot have that story if you don't hold what's going on with the Romans and the absolute destruction around that circles this story. The Romans are winning, and though there will still be bloody Jewish revolts, the Romans have now placed the Jews under a reign of sheer terror. So if you want your movement to survive and to prove yourself the heir of true Israel, you have to do two things. One, be really nice to the Romans. Two, beat up on your rival, not just in the eyes of your own followers, but in the eyes of those Romans as well. Remember what I said last week. You know, how bizarre it was that the Romans are almost never there in the Gospels, or if the centurions appear, they always look so positively to Jesus. It's amazing. You know, even at the story of the crucifixion, right? The pagan centurions, they see the epiphany, the revelation of Jesus as God incarnate. How deprived, therefore, must have the Jews been to be so blind to the light of Jesus. And so the denigration of the Pharisees leads to the
delegitimization.
That what you said, the really the denial of Israel's right to exist. And I want to weigh my words here. Right? Again, it's connected to the Old Testament, right? The old that you have to discard. Well, it's not just the Testament that you have to discard. You have to discard all of the people that goes with it, that has failed to fulfill its destiny by accepting Jesus. Even the Romans, pagans, saw Jesus, and the Jews couldn't see him. Right? So it's not just the Testament that is old and to be discarded, it also is the people. And so the teachings become teachings of contempt, whereby anti-Semitism becomes built into the permanent structure of Christian worship. Again, anti-Semitism becomes built into the permanent structure of Christian worship. And paradoxically, this clash between the sects, this polemical rivalry, this polemical attacks, in fact violates everything Jesus can be presumed to have taught about love. In a million years, he would never have gone down that path. Never. And it surely is in contradiction of what we can presume his own program, the program for his own movement was in fact the ending of the intra-Jewish sectarian conflict that plagued the community in his time. That's what he wanted to work for. He wanted to work for reconciliation. He wanted to work for the end of the explosion of the Jewish nation into so many different sects. He wanted to renew Judaism and embrace each other. That's what he would have said. We have to believe. But these new Christians, these non-Jewish converts of the third generation, say, will be the ones carrying this polemic forward. They're even going to build on it. They're going to build their identity as a religious movement on that. Because that's also a natural thing we do. We try to define ourselves as against what we're not. It's always easier to define who you are if you can point to the enemy, to that which is not you, right? And so that obviously will happen. Okay, now we have looked at supersession. We have looked at the Christian hatred of Jews as having rejected Christ. How does that hatred manifest in Christian scriptures? And how do they sow the seeds for centuries of anti-Jewish hatred and eventually anti-Semitism? Now let's take a look at a few stories. The first story I want to focus on is the story of Jesus coming to Jerusalem, entering the Temple Mount, and attacking the money changers, overturning their tables. We all maybe know that story, remember that story, right? This is the first accusation of the Jews as, money grabber, as greedy people. When, we know that greed is one of the 7 deadly sins, which therefore makes the Jews, all the Jews, as inherently sinful. I mean, come on. How can that not be evil to have money changers, Jews, money changers, desecrating their own most sacred temple with displays of obvious greed? And that trope, right? That trope will eventually, 1500 years later, will give us the evil Shylock, right? Who not only wants all of his money, but is ready to kill the good Christians, to kill the good Jesus, to extract his pound of flesh. And by the way, I don't have time to go into The Merchant of Venice, one of the most anti-Semitic play ever written, but it is in this book, and Dara Horn does an incredible job talking about the deep anti-Semitism at the core of The Merchant of Venice. Again, you don't need more excuses. Read that book, really. It's wonderful. Now, let's go back. Jesus is in Jerusalem, right? He walks up the ramp from the streets at the base of the temple up to the Temple Mount. Now, those of you who have been to Jerusalem with me or not have witnessed the fervor with which religious Jews pray at the Western Wall, right? Or they are swaying and crying and wailing in front of that wall, right? And that might give you a sense, a glimpse at what Jesus felt in his heart as he was climbing those stairs. Not in the presence of the basement wall of the Temple Mount, which is what the Western Wall is, but as he was in the presence of this magnificent temple that he himself as a Jew certainly deeply venerated. I mean, imagine the state of consciousness, the state of mind that he must have been in as he climbed those stairs and just beheld the sight. It's unfathomable. He was in the presence of the Holy of Holies, for him, the most sacred place on earth. Right? The kind of place that overwhelms the faithful, the kind of place that just drops you in deep reverence and humility. And so that's how I picture Jesus walking on the vast platform atop of which sits the great temple. And like the Pharisees, by the way, he is appalled at the corruption, appalled at the collaboration of the Sadducees, of these Hashmonean priests. He's appalled because as a Jew, more than anything else, he loved and revered this most sacred place. The place where God had touched the earth and still touched the earth as far as he was concerned. Only the second, the third generation of this increasingly number of non-Jewish followers could have, out of ignorance, maybe made the mistake to assume that Jesus who disapproved of the priestly caste meant that Jesus disapproved of the temple itself. That he came to Jerusalem to oppose the temple itself, to even seek to destroy it. Because these writers, in fact, will write that they see the Roman destruction of the temple in 70 as proof that God, through the Romans, sided with Jesus. That God repudiated and cursed the Jews. That they see the fact that the burned down temple as vindication of Jesus' own attack on the temple. And I mean, understand that for Jesus, that would have been an absolute abomination. There is no way he would have wished the temple destroyed, burned to the ground. It's just, it's understand. Maybe I need to give more of the context of what the temple actually was. The temple, both the first temple, the second temple, it was much more than just a gathering place for worship. I think maybe in the minds of Christian worshippers, they see the temple and they imagine a cathedral, right? Where you go to the cathedral and you're on your knees and that's but it's not. It's not what that place was for, or only was about. The vast Temple Mount served, in fact, as a community center. Like the word synagogue, Beit Knesset in Hebrew, means literally community center, a place of gathering, because that's how Jews worship. We worship in community. We come together. A synagogue is a community center that we happen to also have prayer, as part of being there. And so think about the temple and the Temple Mount not as a cathedral, but as a community center. So there were gathering happening all around the courtyard, under the porticos. And the Temple Mount was a vast complex that were several blocks wide. It was a huge place. And so Jews would come together. They would probably hear some preachers, in the courtyards, preaching against Rome, maybe. At the time with the destruction all around them, you can be sure that they were, messiahs or false messiahs, warning of the end of days, calling all sinners to repent. I'm imagining chaos. I'm imagining loudness. I'm imagining people, just on a soapbox, telling, repent, everybody, the time is near. That was the place. That was like almost I was gonna say it wasn't a shuk because but it was that kind of it's the Middle East, people. It's not Rome. It's the Middle East. So people came, and they came especially in the days leading to Passover, which is where the story takes place. Yes, they came to worship at the temple. But remember, worshiping at the temple wasn't like today. You open the book and you read prayers. They were temple sacrifices. You brought sacrifices. The priests took care of doing the rituals on your behalf. So you came to the temple, this was a pilgrimage holiday. People came from Alexandria, people came from Babylonia, people came from Turkey, Jews came from all over the place. It was like Muslim going to Mecca, right? It was kind of the same thing. So you arrive in Jerusalem and, in order to fulfill your obligations, your worship obligation, you need to bring to the priest a dove, a pigeon, something to make sacrifice with. You need to come, pay your respect, pay your annual temple tax, right? So it's also part of that was civic duties, right? And so you come from all of those different places in the Middle East, far and wide, right? How do you pay your temple tax? You don't have the local currency. How do you buy the pigeons or whatever animal you need to bring to the priest for sacrifice in the porticos there, in the courtyards of the temple? You need money changers. You need money changers so you can have the appropriate local currency to buy what you need to do for worship. Not because you're going to go gamble at the casino, for worship. And that's why you had money changers. They were there because of worship reasons. They were not willing dealing in whatever. The people who sold the animals were there for worship reasons. And I can tell you, Jesus did not arrive atop the Temple Mount and suddenly discovered in shock and dismay that, oh my gosh, there are money changers right here. Like, oh my God, I never knew there could be such a thing. You can't imagine that. It's not possible. Of course there are money changers. There were money changers there since the temple was built. They were needed for worship reasons. They were needed because that's what people needed to do what they had to do. They offered all of those pilgrims a service. Really, only if one who writes those books has absolutely no clue as to what happened on the Temple Mount. Only one, probably not Jewish, who in his mind saw the temple as a basilica, as a cathedral, which it was not, as I hopefully made it clear by now. Only someone who had that kind of picture in his mind would understand Jesus to have been upset with the money changers or the dove sellers or whatever was reported in those Gospels. Like, you have to be clueless. There's no other possibility. You really, ultimately, when you write these, you really have to not understand Jesus as a Jew. That's really what it comes down to. You have to understand Jesus as non-Jewish, as a guy who a foreigner who just happened on the Temple Mount. That's the only way. Like someone who'd never been to Jerusalem, someone who's not Jewish. That's the only way you can conceive of those stories. And you have to be someone who doesn't know Jesus' message of love, Jesus' message of compassion, Jesus' message of caring for one another, of loving your neighbor as yourself. Because only then, if you have no clue about Jesus and Jesus' teachings, only then will you imagine him throwing a fit of rage and violence, attacking his fellow Jews, overturning the tables on the Temple Mount. That is a complete denial of everything you would understand Jesus to be or to preach. He was the one to preach, non-violent resistance. And he is certainly has a fit of rage and he just attacks everybody. I don't think so. I just don't think so. Maybe what happened was that Jesus started preaching on the Mount, sharing his own message, asking his Jewish brothers to join him in redefining Judaism, in creating a new movement of Jewish renewal. Maybe he preached too much about peace, Maybe he preached too much, in fact, about nonviolent resistance. Maybe he said too many words that were about turning the other cheek, about loving your enemy, loving those different from you, which, while the Jews were steeped in the Passover story of liberation from oppression, while at the same time being faced daily with the murders, the relentless murder and the terror of Rome, maybe that was not the right message to preach on the temple that day. And maybe that message caused an uproar among the people who listened. And maybe in that moment, there were those who were actually moved by the preaching and sided with Jesus And then there were those who took great offense of this message of peace and love at the time of great war and great devastation. You know, all of those people who have, having lost countless of friends and family members in this endless bloodshed. And then I can imagine this group who enjoyed Jesus' teaching and that group who thought he was out of his mind. I can imagine them suddenly beginning to yell at each other, you know, and call each other names. And then things get out of hand. And then, you know, a fist fight ensues. And there's, in the melee, some tables were overturned, some pigeon cages flung open. And then the Roman soldiers came to disperse the crowd because the Romans were were very fearful of what could happen during Passover, because so many thousands of Jews were crowding Jerusalem, and the Romans were on high alert all of these days leading up to Passover and then the days following Passover, because they felt outnumbered by all of these Jews that came to worship. And so they came onto the Temple Mount very quickly, and they dispersed everybody. And then they looked for who started this, because they were concerned it would happen again. And who knows, next time could be the match to the revolt they were so concerned about. And so they searched for him everywhere. They searched for him in a whole city. They didn't find him in that moment. But they sought to arrest him just so that this wouldn't happen again. Now, maybe I'm making this all up, but to me this sounds so much more plausible than the way that the Gospels paint Jesus. But obviously that's not the story we were told. What is it? The story we were told was that Jews were greedy, evil people, always looking to make a buck or a shekel, Jewing people down on the Temple Mount, desecrating their own most sacred space. And so Jesus attacked these sinful, evil Jews. God destroyed their temple through the hands of the Romans, showing us the example to follow. Showing us the example to follow. And so this greed, this evilness, this willingness to destroy what's most sacred will be, in fact, on a full display in the Last Supper, with Judah betrayal, who sells, like the merchant on the temple, who sells out the Son of God to the Romans for a few shekels. So let me share with you a few other renditions of the paintings, the different paintings that really make the point of the story. Look at that one. Look for the Jew in that picture. You found him? He's right there on the left. Look in his hand. He's got a bag of money. I mean, imagine if every time you come to church, you see this picture or the one that I shared with you before. What is the not so subtle message you're receiving every Sunday that you come to church? Every Sunday for thousands of years. Every Sunday. Look at the Jew with a bag of money. Right? Let me share another one. And I could share 1,000. This one. So a little more subtle here. But he's also here on the left. He's green and white. And he hides, you can see, his bag of money behind his cloak. The Jew in the picture. Right? Do you see him on the left there? Not on the extreme left. He's striking his beard, stroking his beard. He's not looking at Jesus. They never do. Judas never looks at Jesus in the eye. Always averts his gaze. In all of those paintings. But he's holding the bag of money right in his hand there. Now I'm going to share one more. The most famous of them all. Michelangelo. It's almost the Beit Midrash. You see all these Jews arguing, probably over Passover, the stories of Passover. That's what's happening. It's the Seder of Passover. Now, it's a little bit more challenging to find Judas here because, but I can tell you, because he's the Old Testament, look for someone old. Everybody else looks pretty young in that picture. I'm going to share with you a close-up of Judas. There he is. So there is Jesus on the right, and then you see his white beard with his hooked nose. And what does he have on his hip? A knife. Right? The knife, because he's going to stab Jesus in the back. The Jew betrayer. The Jew Christ killer. Right there. There's a guy with both his hands up, and the knife is just below, because you wanted to make sure not to identify, And he's hiding behind these people. He's almost like about to ambush Jesus right there. That's Michelangelo. Michelangelo. Anti-Semitic Michelangelo. Right? That knife, in fact, tells the second story, the core of anti-Semitic barbarism that Christianity will visit upon the Jews for 2,000 years and counting. The Jews killed Jesus. So it's not just that we rejected Jesus. That would have been something. It's not just that we didn't see the light of Christianity having superseded Judaism, but we killed Jesus. The Jews are Christ killers, right? And this, scholars write, is the supreme hatred. The accusation of not just being Christ killer, of being God killer, right? The Jew, Judas, denounced Jesus in the story, right? The Jewish leadership demanded and pushed for his death. And that's never happened. They were celebrating Passover. They didn't have time for that. The Jews followed the lead of their leadership and shouted in the streets of Jerusalem, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" There's no way. I made that point last week. I'm not going to make it again. No way on one of the holiest days of the week, that on one of a Shabbat, where you're supposed to actually be worshiping, or at least, you're not in the streets screaming, "Crucify him." No, there's no way. That is completely made up. But that gives us the Good Friday liturgy. And the Good Friday liturgy has the story I just told you. Had that story until just a few popes ago. Actually, until the 1960s. And so for almost 2,000 years, that story of the Jews, betrayer, the Jews, Christ killer, repeated every year, in every generation, in Catholic Europe and then beyond that. The cruel insult, perfidis Judaeus, the perfidious Jew. Every Easter was, and we'll talk about that, the most dangerous time to be Jewish in Christendom. Most dangerous time, because of the priests, because of the stories rehashed every year. And every year Jews just hid during Easter. In the earliest gospel, the Gospel of Mark, Mark writes that it is the crowd that sets itself against the Jews, against Jesus. The crowd. That's what he calls the people there. The crowd. You can see that's the earliest. That's the closest to the sibling rivalry. The crowd has set itself against Jesus. Then in Matthew's, the words change a little bit. Now it's not the crowd, which is pretty indistinct, right? It could be anybody. Now it's the people. The people. Still amorphous, still not, but it's more precise than the crowd. And John, finally John spells it out clearly, and John identifies the enemy of Jesus as the Jews. And throughout John's gospel, he, more than any other gospel, he's the last one, he uses the Jews dozens of times wherever he can to retell the stories. And when you say the Jews, you accuse all the Jews, not just the group of Jews that you have painted as being present, the small crowd, as Mark told us. No, you accuse the entire nation, the entire Jewish nation of the time, painting them all as guilty and punishable, but you also accuse all future generations, visiting the pseudo-sin of the fathers onto the children for thousands of years. And this is that same anti-Semitic accusation I hear when statements against Israel are made, using Israel this or Israel that, as if Israel was a generic, all-inclusive, not just of the entirety of the Israeli population, but really, by extension, of the evil Zionists, because that's the new branding, the evil Zionist Jews in America, in Europe, wherever, who support clearly this most racist state, where it seems all Israelis, because when you say Israel, you include all Israelis, are evil, instead of taking offense if you disagree with a specific Israeli policy or a specific Israeli government, you can attack that. That's legitimate. And if you know anything about Israeli politics, any Israeli government will never represent all of Israeli voters, let alone the majority of them, right? So, to me, the analogy is, how would you feel? How would you feel if you were sharply opposed to Trump's policies, say, right? Let's say you were sharply opposed to Trump's policies during the Trump administration. You loathed the Trump policies, right? And then you traveled abroad, if you could have, obviously, maybe before COVID. And while you're abroad, you hear people talking about how America is evil, how America is racist, how America is attacking minorities, how America is attacking immigrants. How would you feel? And when people say Israel, as in this example people say America, or the Americans, or the Israelis, which is the new version, understand, the new version of John saying the Jews, right? It's this anti-Semitic broad accusation that, when you lump entire people without giving the granularity of all the opposing parties in Israel, of the near majority of Israelis who also oppose the policies of their government. But you say the Jews, you say the Israelis, you say Israel. It's like saying the blacks or the gays, right? I mean, we would never let anybody say that. So how do we let people say the Jews or the Israelis? You're making a blank statement, an all-encompassing statement that erases anyone's individuality, any subgroup, any diversity, any granularity. To me, this is a racist comment, an anti-Semitic comment, just as the blacks or the gay would be a racist and homophobic statement. Now, I'm gonna step off of my little soapbox here. And I want to finish here on time. So I want to go back to our story. Pontius Pilate washes his hands of Jesus' blood, right? In John, he's described saying, to the Jews here again, here is your king. And they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Now, I could try and prove to you, I think I have, but maybe even more, the absurdity of such a scene. The absolute impossibility for any Jew to have had any such power over the Romans at that time. You know, as if they were asked by Pontius Pilate of their opinion. What should they do, right? To have had any such power is ridiculous. It is not even a remote possibility. The truth is, the Romans killed Jesus. Period. The Romans killed Jesus. And if you want to make it more spiritual, God the Father killed Jesus. Because this is a retelling of the Akedah, of the sacrifice of Isaac. But the writers of the Gospels didn't want to accuse Rome of anything, obviously. And so they pushed past the early sibling rivalry of the first decade following Jesus' death and made the Jews the mortal enemies of Jesus. John, first book, verse 11, he writes, his own people received him not. Right? So the very structure of the Jesus story required the rejection by the people with whom he first identified. This way, there was plausible deniability that Jesus was Jewish at all. The Jews have to have rejected him. They had sponsored his murder. Now, Jews were now guilty of the most vicious slander. And St. Paul, later on, after the gospel, St. Paul goes one step further. After having claimed Roman citizenship to escape from the Jews himself, he says in the book of Romans, that's the book he wrote, the Jews, and I quote, the Jews are the enemy of God. Jesus was the Messiah, and Jews rejected him. And it's going to take, like I said earlier, the Vatican Council Declaration of October 28, 1965. That's 20 years after the Shoah, after the Holocaust. It's going to take them 20 years after the Holocaust for the church to acknowledge the devastatingly anti-Semitic wording of the Gospels and of Christian scriptures. But for 1900 years, Jews had been defined by the church as the negative other. The negative other, the antithesis of all that Jesus stood for. And if you understand that, what the Jews really were described to be is the Antichrist. The Antichrist. Now, I hope I've made it clear by now. We're almost done for tonight. And then I'll take questions at the time. I hope I've made it clear by now that generations of Christians were raised with these anachronistic ideas of Judaism. Generations of Christians were raised with a wrong understanding of Judaism. The priests and the Pharisees, worship at the temple, the stereotypes of the vengeful Old Testament God. That's what most people would say is Judaism about. Priests, Pharisees, worship at the temple, and this vengeful, wrathful Old Testament God. Because they knew very little, they knew almost nothing of the living tradition of Jewish thought, of Jewish observance. And that ignorance was reflected in the Christian assertion that after Jesus, Israel had been superseded by the new Israel, the church of Christ. So when the priest at the consecration ritual says, and I quote, "This is the cup of the new covenant," right? He is pronouncing the old covenant as superfluous. That covenant now after Jesus must be banned from the sanctuary. And the Jews' job from this point forward is to do us the pleasure and the honor to disappear. Now, from the Christian point of view, just by continuing to exist, Jews are dissenting, right? And that imagined dissent is then interpreted by Christians as being necessarily the core of what Jews are and the core of what Jews believe. Why else would the Jews stick around all these thousands of years if not to be a constant pain in the thigh and a reminder to Christians that maybe, just maybe, Jesus wasn't the Messiah after all, right? And then furthermore, being the new Israel and having been adopted through Jesus into being now God's new chosen people, right? That's what Christianity is going to do, right? Now the new Israel is therefore the new chosen people. How could this rejecting Christ-killing Jews, those once chosen but no more, how can they still be here? Why are they still here? And so to the Christians, therefore, the existence of the Jew continues to be an insult. At least according to the gospel and Christian liturgy up until, 60, 70 years ago, until 1965. So I'm about to do just a quick recap, and then we'll open it for question. The stories and teachings of Jesus were derived from Jewish scriptures, right? From Psalms, from prophets, from the Torah. Now they were twisted around to support the claim that Jesus was the prophesied Messiah of those scriptures, right? Now the Jews rejected such a claim. Jews rejected Jesus. But this claim led to supersession. That's Christianity has superseded Judaism. Now Christians are the new chosen people of God. Judaism is the old, the passé, the aborted religion that Christianity came to save and couldn't, and then continued to and furthered. Jews are driven by greed. Jews, again, not just rejected but betrayed Jesus. Jews killed Jesus. Jews are the enemies of Christ. Jews are the Antichrist, the evil enemy of God himself. Now, if you hear this, what I have tried to paint this time around, this is setting up a cosmic struggle between good and evil. And the Jews being defined as evil, obviously, associated with Satan. In fact, because we actually read that in the Gospel of Mark and eventually completely identify with Satan in the Gospel of John, where in chapter 8 of John, Jesus is portrayed as denouncing, once again, the Jews, right? By the way, the Jews appear 71 times in John. And he described the Jew as the offspring of Satan. Quote, "You are your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning." Right? So John is making an actual identifiable group into the symbol of all evil. Right? And that will have, as we'll see, not just religious, but also social and dire political implication. With John, Jews have become not just the historical enemy, but the ontological enemy, the negative against which every positive aspect of Christianity comes to be defined. And the demonizing of the Jews by these first century followers of Jesus, increasingly non-Jews, and the canonizing of the scriptures that are what made this story so dangerous, so murderous down the centuries. Now, I want to leave you with one quote, and that's it. That's the end of tonight. A quote that is attributed to Gregory of Nyssa. I think I'm pronouncing this correctly. Who wrote in the 4th century, so the 300s, a publication that in my book really summarizes tonight's session. I quote, murderers of the Lord, murderers of the prophets, rebels and full of hatred against God, they commit outrage against the law, resist God's grace, repudiate the faith of their fathers. They are confederates of the devil, offspring of vipers, scandal mongers, slanderers, darkened in mind, leaven of the Pharisees, Sanhedrin of demons, utterly vile, quick to abuse, enemies of all that is good. And this will nurture generations after generations of Christians through the century. And so on this very high note, we close, in fact, the first chapter on our journey, and we will start turning our attention next time, which is in 2 weeks. There's no class next week. In 2 weeks, we'll turn to some much more joyful passages of Jewish history through anti-Semitism, the Crusades. So I look forward to sharing all of this with you next time. Thank you for being here tonight. I know I went an extra 5 minutes. I hope you won't hold it against me. I hope it was interesting and that you got a lot out of it. It looks like as I was talking, a lot of people had a conversation in the chat. I don't think I have the time to go through everything. You're welcome to stay a few minutes if you so choose. I will try to answer some questions. If not, if you are, and we are grateful for your ongoing support, one of you who are helping this course by making a little donation, and if tonight inspired you, please go ahead and find on our website a way to make a small donation. It could be $1, it could be $10. We don't care. It's just to show your appreciation for the course, and we would really appreciate it. Now, there are a few people who have their hands up, and I thank you for all your thank yous. If you're leaving the Zoom call, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Rich, you were the first one. You've been waiting very patiently. Just understand that this is still being recorded, and so whatever you will say will be held against you in a court of law or whatever the case might be.
Go for it. No, I wanted to bring up because when you were quoting John,
Yeah,
and John is probably the most anti-Semitic of the gospel.
I agree.
The scene where Pilate brings Jesus out, and he gives them a choice between I am relating it here as it is in John.
Sure.
You know, not what happened historically, because the only thing I can say definitely about that was probably wasn't the way John portrayed it. But in any event, he brings them out, and it says at the time there was a custom, no, there wasn't, of, freeing one prisoner. And he gives the people a choice between Jesus of Nazareth and Jesus Barabbas, who was a zealot leader. And according to John, the Sadducees go in among the crowd and get the people to ask for Barabbas to be released. And Pilate's answer to them was, "You would have me crucify your king." And their response, according to John, was, "We have no king but Caesar."
Oh, wow.
What Jew in that time in his right mind would have said that?
Yeah. No.
You know, but that's it. I mean,
Right.
Look it up. It says, "We have no king but Caesar." And they threatened to basically report him to Caesar if he doesn't crucify Jesus.
Yeah.
Now, shortly after this, Pilate gets recalled. This is historically. Pilate gets recalled by the Emperor Tiberius for going overboard in his cruelty.
Mm.
How bad do you got to be?
I was going to say. Wow.
You know, and he was notoriously anti-Semitic,
Yeah.
Pilate.
Yes.
But in any event, I wanted to bring up that part about we have no king but Caesar, because it goes back to the point of we're trying to make the Romans our buddies.
Right. The polemical aspect of those stories, of course.
Right.
Sorry, my little dog wanted to get some attention. Professor, I'm sorry, I'm probably not going to pronounce your name correctly, so maybe you can.
Just try. That's Nopes.
Nopes.
Yes. I'm very sorry because that's my first time, I think, I meet with a Jewish community for the first time in my life.
Welcome.
That's one of the time I longed for. And this is the first time I can talk to a rabbi.
Hmm.
And so I have, I'm really interested in hearing and sharing about anti-Semitism because I've taken classes of the Holocaust
Yes.
and genocide studies. My scholarship is in peace and conflict resolution.
Hmm.
And I am from the Democratic Republic of the Congo,
Mm-hmm.
DRC, a war-torn country. And I wanted to meet with people from Israel.
Uh-huh.
I missed one of the trip I had to do in 2017 because my boss didn't want me to travel. But at least today I meet with you, and I can hear from a rabbi speaking. The most challenging problem you may not imagine is for me, a Christian, a believer from Africa, who had no clues about Jews and nothing, let me say nothing, I can say that way. So, and I started to know about Jews only from the Bible.
Uh-huh.
And when I started my studying of the Holocaust, then I started hearing things, say, what happened there? And now you go, you are talking about things. I think my understanding this, the Bible was not well written. It may be that those who wrote the Bible wrote things that are not accurate, especially when you gave the example saying it's not possible to hear people saying something used the day of Yom Kippur. What's
Passover.
Passover. Sorry, yes. Passover. So you said it wasn't possible to hear such a thing from a Jew. Also, you said it was just impossible for a Jew like Jesus to go and violently push away everything in the temple, because that was something that existed before. And so,
And that wouldn't be who he is. That was not who he was. If we
Yes.
believe who he was,
yes,
that was not
so,
his preaching. That was not his identity. He would not have done that.
so it is for me a deconstruction.
Ah,
It is a deconstruction, and I have to make efforts to continue to hear
yes,
and to get what I can get from it, and see what will happen within me and within my society. So
I deeply appreciate.
that's what I want to say.
Yes.
And I think I will have the first lesson somewhere to hear the first
Yes.
lesson, because I missed it. And one of the participants, Paulina, I hope I pronounce it well, send me
The link.
a link to,
Oh, good.
and Beth to show me where I can find
Great.
the first lesson.
Great.
So I thank you very much, and I really thank every people who are here, and I will learn a lot, and I would like to keep contact with everyone if
Sure.
possible, because
Absolutely.
that's the community I would like to always have some lessons if I can change anything. And but it's necessary to end by saying what we should remove from people's habits,
Yes.
and what we should change according to you in the Bible, right?
And just so you know, like I said, in 1965, the church started to make changes to their modality of worship, and are there. It depends on the Pope, but there's been some work to right those wrongs.
Because I can be anti-Semitic without being aware of that.
Yes, because it's part of how you were raised and how you were.
Yes.
Yeah,
I can
absolutely.
be anti-Semitic without being aware that I am anti-Semitic.
Absolutely.
That's
Just
the
like,
way I can now, because my socialization make me anti-Semitic.
Yes.
But I struggle with that, because for me, being anti-Semitic, I consider to be a sin for me.
And
hating Jews is just hate my brothers.
yes,
That's my own.
I so deeply appreciate you and the challenging work you're willing to do for yourself, and I hope I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks for the next session.
Thank you very much, Ravi.
Thank you, Professor.
Paulina, thank you very much, and Beth.
Paulina is going to talk. He's going to ask a question next.
I have a question. My closest friend is a Polish woman, grew up in socialist Poland, a little younger than me. And she asked me, honestly, how can people not expect to be hated when they call themselves the chosen people? And I have been puzzling over this for a long time. And you just said that Christianity considers themselves the new chosen, but Christianity doesn't go around using that phrase, whereas we use that phrase still, and I have trouble with it. And I thought that was a reasonable question.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that if you remember, Rabbi Ted always talked about in the way to kind of rephrase that. It's not like we are the chosen people amongst all the other peoples of the earth. Is that we are the chosen people for the Jewish path. That is our path. That is our spiritual journey. That is our books. That is our lineage, and we're chosen for that particular way of worship. And other people are chosen for their own way of worship through the Quran or through the Christian Bible or through whatever tradition they're a part of. And I think that's the evolution of that teaching that needs to happen on our side as well. And it comes from that sibling rivalry. Just, it's, just as, they didn't like each other. And, the concept of chosenness was one that was really debated and was really, again, because of supersession on the Christian side, they really wanted to reclaim that title, that Christianity was now the new chosen people. Why are the Jews more brandishing this than other people? I think because it's there is comfort when you are faced with so much violence over so many generations to hold on to at least something that is connecting you to your God, to your roots, and to persevere. And so that's why I think as a way to not lose our minds and to not lose ourselves, sometimes we have, resorted to those little sentences, the chosen people, to shore ourselves up.
Quick question. This is actually pretty historical, so it should be a short answer, perhaps. Same friend says, when did the Jews begin to be referred to as the Jews? Because my friend points out that Israel actually can be said to, at least according to her sources, is from Egypt, actually. The Egyptian god, and then Ra, and then El being God. It's a conjugation of those, which I've never heard from anybody else, but there's some sources that point to it. So then, right.
Yeah, there's a lot of those things going around, and I don't know how reliable any of those sources are.
But the Jews, let's get back to that.
So and I'm going to talk a bit later during the course. The word Jewish in English actually is not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew that gets translated as Jewish is Yehudi, and Yehudi is a descendant of the tribe of Yehuda. So Jews were never identified according to their religious affiliation, but it was a tribal consciousness. We had the 12 tribes, and the only surviving tribes out of the 12 tribes of Israel are the Kohen, the Levites, and the Yehudim, the tribe of Judah. And so we are the better translation would be we were Judahites, right? Or in the later Greek translation, we are Judeans. We are, the name of our people is connected to the land from which we come, which is why I'm not really giving any too much about we're from Egypt, we're not from Egypt. Historically, the first time we see the word Israel ever inscribed on anything is on a stela that was carved through hieroglyphs, carbon dated to 1200 BCE, where it recalls the wars of the Pharaoh, who finally conquered and destroyed Israel. And that's where the word Israel shows up. Conquered and destroyed. So the first time we see anything about Israel is the announcement of their destruction. Talk about that for an omen. And as we'll see, the Egyptians came and went, the Babylonian came and went, the Assyrian Empire came and went, the Persian Empire came and went, the Greek Empire came and went, the Roman Empire came and went. We're going to see how many more are going to come and go, and we're still here. So that Pharaoh was wrong. that Pharaoh was very wrong. All right, one more question, Steve. You have to unmute yourself. Thanks, Paulina.
Sorry. I was wondering if you've ever had a debate along the lines that what you shared with us today with any Christian religious leaders, and if so, what can you have them to share with us? Am I clear?
Your internet connection is a little bit challenging. So, but you're asking, if I'm correct, if I have shared this course with Christian leaders and what they say about it. Is that what you're asking?
Can I? Yeah, you just froze.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to know whether what you've told us tonight you've ever shared with Christian religious leaders, and if so, how it's been received.
Well, the religious Christian leaders I visit with are usually very progressive and live and preach from a very open heart and are very, in fact, conscious and aware. I mean, what I've shared is, like I said in the first class, is not that I'm making anything up. I've resourced and sourced every single sentence that I have shared with you tonight. I mean, you know, I have made it my own narrative, but there is great scholarship, both Jewish and Christian, out there. And if any Christian clergy person is at all committed to their religion and their practice, and have done their homework, they would need me to have mentioned that to them. So, you know, I am sure that I live in a little spiritual bubble of progressive religious people, and I don't think I think it would not be a shock to anybody. I'm sure it would, like it would, you know, it would offend probably those who are much more committed to maybe a more orthodox way, or, you know, I have met Christians, you know, with my kippah on the bus or somewhere who are telling me that I'm going to go to hell. So if I were telling them this story, I'm sure they would not take it kindly. But for the people that I surround myself with, it's never been a problem. They're very much aware and actually doing some great work, just like we are doing great work around racism. All of us have limitations that we need to overcome and heal ourselves and grow ourselves. So it's never been a problem. Thank you. Good night, everybody. If you're on the Facebook group because you've been supporting the class, feel free to jot some comments or questions in the Facebook private chat room that we have. I'm happy to continue discussing this via Facebook as the course goes on. We'll see you in 2 weeks, not next week.
Are you still speaking French?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you still speaking French? Because
oui, bien sûr, je parle français.
Parce que j'ai vu que vous avez un passé français.
Oui.
Merci.
Bonsoir. Laila
Bonsoir,
Tov.
merci.
Good night, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Oh, God.